We greet you this morning in Jesus' name. Certainly echo. It's been a blessing to have been here this morning. I've been challenged and encouraged very much. This past week, I was thinking long and hard about what to share today, and I'm not so certain that, we all like to share something that is timely for our audience. And so later on in the week, I sort of struggled with this topic, and it felt like I had an affirmation, so I moved forward encouraged and have decided to try to share with you on this subject today. It is a very important subject. The title of the message is An Understanding Heart. You can continue to contemplate on that understanding heart. I missed the presence of my wife this morning. Her and her siblings are traveling back from Pennsylvania. They attended her uncle's funeral this past week, and then they were delayed on their return by some sickness, and it wasn't so pleasant. Probably some understanding was needed. So look forward to her return. An understanding heart. It is very important what we hear from each other, isn't it? But it is so much more important what we understand from each other. Understanding has a tremendous impact upon us. What we decide, how we treat each other, what we do. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." I'm not sure who you think of in the Bible when you think of an understanding heart. Who in the Bible to you had an understanding heart? You can think about that. Something that I was surprised by, that was when I did a search about understanding in the Bible, how often it's found in the Bible. I think it was 156 times that my search turned up. And it's in the Old Testament a lot, and some in the New. For some reason, I always thought that King Solomon had asked for wisdom. And you might say, yes, he did, but I did not realize or didn't remember that the verses read the way that it reads, where Solomon implored God after he had been designated king. Maybe we'll come across those verses later, but in Proverbs, he says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." So if we're not to use our own understanding, whose understanding or what understanding is it that we're to use? In studying, I also came across the life and ministry of Jesus in the Gospels. And I came to realize that I believe that in history, I don't know of any man, as Christ was in the flesh to us, that was more misunderstood than our Savior, Jesus Christ. All the way to the cross, as he hung there on the cross. We'll come over some of that a little bit later on. But as he hung there on the cross, even one of the thieves who were hanging by his side misunderstood him. And his accusers and his crucifiers as well. It's not hard to think of times in our lives that we have been misunderstood. It's easy to happen. And this humanity that we have, it's easy to misunderstand each other. I have just a couple of practical illustrations of misunderstandings that happen. Most demographics of our life and relationships are subject to misunderstanding. We're in this human flesh, and it is prone to that. It's easy to happen. There was a man that was traveling, and he had trouble with his car, and he rushed into a service station. He said, "I need a bottle of 710. I need some 710. And they were like, 710? What is that? We don't know what you're talking about. He said, "Yeah, you should have it. You should have a bottle of 710. And so they proceeded to discuss. And so finally he went to the car, and he got what he was talking about. And I'll show you what we're talking about. So he went in there and he said, I need a bottle of 710. And finally they realized that you just need to look at it this way. Needed a bottle of oil. Upside down, it read 710. Some of these are interesting. They're humorous. I remember years ago, I'm just going to give this as a practical illustration of what can happen. We had some visiting youth in the community, and we decided that we're going to go pontooning on Kentucky Lake. And so we made arrangements, and we had our 2 pontoon boats, and so we split up, and we started off. And the summer had been dry, and the water was a little lower than normal. And as we were making our way across the lake, all of a sudden, we were the lead boat, we discovered that our propeller was getting into some mud. We were in shallow water. And so upon discovering this, the sound and all of this of the motor behind us was quite concerning. So what do you think we did? We all rushed to the back of the boat to see what was going on. We lacked understanding. Well, it immediately stopped our boat. And so the one of the boys in the back said very quickly, hey, everybody move to the center, to the front of the boat. And so we did. We discovered very quickly that by moving to the front of the boat, that lodged the front of the boat into the mud. And so after some deliberation and discussion, we realized we needed to be in the center of the boat. And after we were in the center of the boat, and we raised the motor, we were able to ease across this mud spot, this high spot in the water, and make us on our way. Well, after we had done that, we watched the boat behind us, knowing that they were going to encounter the same spot. And I guess they were enjoying themselves. They didn't much see what happened to us. And so soon they encountered the same spot. And so we sat back and we were at the point of laughter. We were humorously watching them repeat exactly the same scenario that we had repeated. They were too far away for us to shout to them. So we watched them. Very soon, all of a sudden, they all went to the back of the boat. And very shortly, they all went to the front of the boat. And then soon after, they got it together, went to the center of the boat, and they figured their way out of the same problem. Understanding, being able to comprehend. The definition for understanding, as the dictionary gave it, the ability by which one understands, intelligence, concepts that are beyond the understanding of a child, the quality or condition of one who understands, comprehension, reasoning. And then it asks the question, do you have much understanding of calculus? Are we able to calculate? As you interact one with another, are you able to calculate? Are you able to make some observations and calculations and understand each other? Understand your likes or dislikes? What encourages you? What discourages you? We know marriage is no exception to this. For us that are married, we soon learned that misunderstandings can easily happen. One lady wrote that on a shopping list for my husband, next to the fruits and vegetables, I write this word, check dates. My husband came home with a beautiful box of Moroccan dates. I don't know if you know what those are. You ladies might know what those are. They're fruit from South America, I do think. I probably wouldn't be too fond of them, but as I hear, they're distinguished. Some people really like them. She meant for him to check the dates on the fruits and vegetables. He went to the aisle where the dates were and bought a beautiful box of dates. There's a story about Jimmy Carter. He visited a college in a foreign country. I think it was Japan. And he was to give an important speech. And as it is, when you go into another culture and things may be sort of awkward, you have this language barrier, and he had an interpreter. And it really caught my eye what the interpreter did. And I think what the interpreter did for Jimmy Carter is what we sometimes need to do for each other. Stand in. Are we able to stand into a misunderstanding and bridge that gap? So Jimmy commenced to start out with a joke. And it was a rather short one. And Jimmy realized soon after giving the joke, by his own admission, that, yeah, it was sort of a weird one. It wasn't really suited for the occasion. He gave it, and it was a short one. And to his surprise, the audience laughed, and they laughed about it. They thought it was funny. Well, Jimmy wondered, what did the interpreter say? And so after the speech, he urged the interpreter to break down what did he tell the audience. And here's what he told the interpreter told the audience. He said, Jimmy Carter has said a funny story. Now everybody laugh. And that's why they laughed. Jimmy wasn't able to tell exactly what the interpreter had said, but the interpreter stood in for him and made Jimmy feel welcome and at home for his speech. There are other examples of misunderstandings that have happened in history. Something that I like to note, and that is sometimes when we're sloppy and we have a misunderstanding with each other, especially in our relationships, it can be tragic. Relationships have been broken by misunderstandings. Separations have occurred. Somewhat to illustrate this, there's a story that I read about a misunderstanding that happened in 1953. It says a peculiar legal situation occurred in 1953 when two British men, 19-year-old Derek Bentley and 16-year-old Christopher Craig, were caught red-handed by the police as they attempted to rob a warehouse. Here was the misunderstanding. At some point during the robbery, a police officer had cornered the two and asked Christopher Craig to hand over his gun. Derek Bentley, which was his companion, said to Craig, "Let him have it, Chris." Apparently, Craig understood this as shoot the guy. And so Craig aimed the gun, fired, killing one officer and injuring another. Derek had meant for Craig to give up and hand the officer his gun. During the trial, the jury debated about the exact meaning of the phrase and eventually settled around the notion that it meant shoot the guy, Chris. As a result, Derek Bentley was convicted of murder by joint enterprise and then hanged. There was a misunderstanding between these two criminals. And as a result, the one that had meant for him to hand the gun over to the officer and surrender was convicted of murder and then hung. So it is in our human relationships. If we're not careful, we can also experience a tragic relational loss. I'd like to liken understanding to a bridge. When we approach a bridge, we see the nice asphalt. I don't know how many of you have approached the bridge on 68 and 80, north of Murray, going to Cadiz, Kentucky. I always like to approach that bridge at night, see the beautiful lights. It's interesting how they have situated those in a good way, and it looks like a welcoming sight. Underneath the asphalt, there are I-beams of steel. These I-beams do the hard work. So it is in our relationships. Relationships without understandings are beautiful things you can see without much strength. They don't have the strength to allow heavy things to transit over the bridge. We need strength in these bridges between us. And to that extent, sometimes we like for a wider bridge so that we can traverse heavy relational content over the bridge. And note that we have to build on this bridge lengthwise and not widthwise. So if we widen the bridge without expanding this way as well, we face the potential for collapse or another misunderstanding. In World War II, there was an incident that happened, and it led to a disastrous result. In World War II, Japanese forces invaded and occupied Kiska Island, a United States territory. Because of its location, Allied forces had to recover it before advancing further east towards the main theater of war. So they planned an invasion of the Kiska Island, with Canadian forces landing on the northern side of the island and U.S. forces on the south side. There are also verses in Proverbs that reference knowledge and how important it is to have knowledge. Proverbs 4 verse 7 says, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." Understanding and knowledge was lacking in this situation, where the Canadian and the USA forces decided to invade this island that they believed the Japanese were upon. What the Allies didn't know was that the Japanese had abandoned the island 2 weeks earlier after they realized it was far too away from their supply lines and impossible to defend. During the invasion, the Allied forces were on the edge the entire time, expecting a fierce fight to break out at any moment. Something that's easy for us to do is come to relationships loaded with perceptions, pre-created perceptions. If I come to a relationship and I have a perception of that person gets angry, then often my defense will be up. If I come there and I believe that this person is a backstabber, I will approach the relationship accordingly. And sometimes we do that to our demise. The love of God is always the best thing to bring. That always needs to be present. So on with the story. More than once, the American and Canadian forces mistook each other for enemies and engaged in the occasional bout of friendly fire. These episodes were made worse by the fact that the Japanese had booby-trapped and mined the island, which increased the confusion. By the time the invasion was over, 92 Allied soldiers were killed fighting an absent enemy. There was nobody present, and the tragedy of 92 soldiers was left. So it is in our relationships. Sometimes we come and we have these perceptions, and we don't realize the real heart of the individual. So important. In Proverbs 18 verse 2, it says, "A fool hath no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself." In our human heart, we like to depend on our own understanding. And as Solomon wrote, that we should lean not on our own understanding, but look to God for understanding. A fool has no delight in his understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. Am I preoccupied with discovering myself, presenting myself, my point? Proverbs 9 verse 10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding." In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 12, "He that is void of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holdeth his peace." It's easy to drive by our neighbor's house and see something and build our understanding upon that, when in fact, sometimes it is entirely incorrect. In Exodus chapter 31, the Lord spoke to Moses, and something that is interesting to me as I was reading about understanding in the Bible, God had an interest in that his temple, tabernacle, was to be built by someone of understanding. He had a lot of detail that he wanted in the tabernacle, and he wanted the children of Israel to follow it very carefully. We today are God's tabernacle on this earth. God dwells in our heart, and God built us with understanding in mind. Are you willing to take upon yourself the understanding of God in the place of your own? It says in chapter 31, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, See, I have called my name Bezalel, the son of Uriah, the son of Ur, the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, and wisdom, and in understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship." Is that your target today? To build in wisdom and in understanding and in the knowledge that you have gathered. and that your workmanship is going to be that of understanding. One thing that happened that happened when I was a young boy, I'm going to say this for maybe some of our younger boys can identify with this. My dad and his brother were out hunting, and it was back on the farm that I grew up on. And they came around a corner, and it was on a morning where there was fog. And my dad had the rifle, and his brother had binoculars. And they were panning the wood line, and they found some deer. In the fog, they were able to see some deer through binoculars that they couldn't see with the naked eye. And so my dad had his rifle, and he was steadying for a shot. And it was going to be a long-range shot. I think it was somewhere just over 400 yards. And he saw a deer, and he steadied on the deer and pulled the trigger. And so when they came up to where the deer was there was a deer and two more laying on the ground. So 3 deer in one shot. And so my dad and his brother looked at each other like, well, how did this happen? And then my uncle proceeded to tell him that through the binoculars he was able to make out that there was a very small deer that was standing in front of the large deer. And my uncle just thought that my dad would be aiming at the large deer. Well, that's what my dad was aiming at or shot for, but he did not see the small deer. And my uncle also noticed that behind this big deer was another deer. And my uncle thought that, well, at that distance, it's not likely that that bullet would go through that big deer and into the next. And so my dad shot, and they came there, and there was 3 dead deer. And it was against the regulations of the law to take 3 unantlered deer. And so they had this situation where there was a misunderstanding or a lack of communication. And upon observation, the bullet clipped the top of the shorter deer and hit the large deer low in the heart and proceeded through the large deer into the 3rd deer. And that's what took all 3 of them out. Something that I have sought to do with my staff at work, probably haven't done it the best, and even with my family and others close to me. I don't know that I have really got the words like I like for them to be, but I have asked on occasion, what are you shooting for? What is your target? And I find that very, very helpful in a very practical way when we understand what our friend, family member, coworker, whoever it is in our life, what their target is. When we understand that, it takes care of a lot of things that can go sideways or out of place quickly. God made us for understanding. Can we avail ourselves to that? In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. As people observe our lives, are they able to come away with that belief about us? Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What is their experience for us? We know God was frustrated at times with the children of Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 28, he said to Moses in frustration, for they are a nation void of counsel, neither is there any understanding in them. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would understand their latter end. There's a very, very important part of life that will help our understanding, and that is when we consider our latter end. The destiny. All of us are going to arrive somewhere. As we consider that, it really helps us apply understanding. A practical example of understanding is found in 1 Samuel chapter 25, the account of Nabal and his wife Abigail. I probably won't turn to that, considering the clock is racing here with me. But in that situation, Nabal had a lot of livestock, and a farm. And he had workers and helpers. And David was in that sort of desert experience of his life. And he was out, you could say, like a wild man. He had not been appointed king of Israel yet. And it seemed to me, reading this account, that Nabal was a logical thinker, and maybe to his own downfall. That is something that we as humans, we need to contend with, and that is the difference between the brethren and the sisters, the men and the women in our thought patterns. Often that can lead us to misunderstandings. Us men are logical thinkers. We're driven to do things. Our sisters are blessed with the ability to feel and to be able to think on the things, maybe the smaller things one would say, but they're so important. They make an experience. And they often are left to try to fill in the gaps for us men. We are logical thinkers, and we're driven to accomplish things. Such was the case of Nabal and his wife. It says in verse 3, now the name of this man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. She was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. Later on in the chapter, it talks about how that Nabal accused David of being a man not tied down anywhere, but just a loose wild man out running around. Why should he have any obligation to David? Well, David had defended Nabal's livestock and servants against adversaries, both human adversaries and animals, predators. And he had done all of this work. And it's believed that Nabal understood that David had protected him and his belongings. And so David humbly asked for some goods in repayment for this. And he sent a delegation of his men to ask Nabal. And he was very careful to do so humbly. Thy servant, he used good words. But Nabal was, as it says, churlish and evil. And he railed against the men and against David. And so his wife sprung into action, and she went and met David. And David said to her that if you had not exercised understanding, this is not the exact words, but in other words, exercising understanding, and it came and conveyed to David what she did, that David was going to come and wipe Nabal and all his household out. And David said that she had prevented him from shedding blood. In that chapter, we read then how that Nabal had a heart experience. I don't know if you call that a heart attack or what it was, but he was left as a stone. I would interpret that potentially as him being in a vegetable condition, as we know, unable to do anything. And then later, I think it was like 10 days later, God smote him. And he died. Abigail had an understanding heart, and she was able to stand in. And then on to Solomon. When Solomon became king, and Solomon was faced with judging the people or ruling the people, it says in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And in verse 11, and God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thy understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there is none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And in chapter 4, verse 29 of 1 Kings there, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding, exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. For some reason in my mind, I thought that Solomon had more specifically asked for wisdom. But it says here, an understanding heart. And I was so blessed by that. Wisdom is the result of a heart where understanding is applied. And it says in Kings 4:29 there, it does use the word wisdom. Wisdom was the result of Solomon's understanding heart. As I think of characters in the Bible or people in the Bible that ran into circumstances of life where there was a lot that was hard to understand, Job came to mind, and I was amazed at how many times the word understand or understanding is in the book of Job. He says in Job 28, verse 12, "But where shall wisdom be found, or where's the place of understanding? Man knoweth not the price thereof, neither is it found in the land of the living. The depth saith, It is not in me, and the sea saith, It is not with me. It cannot be gotten for gold, neither shall silver be weighed for the price thereof. It cannot be valued with gold of Ophir, with the precious onyx or the sapphire. The gold and the crystal cannot equal it, and the exchange of it shall not be for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of pearls, for the price of wisdom is above rubies. The topaz of Ethiopia shall not equal it, neither shall it be valued with pure gold," not even with pure gold. It here likens the understanding to something more than pure gold. That's incredible. To me, that is incredible. That Job came to the place where he realized that to have understanding. He was so misunderstood by his friends. So misunderstood by his friends. Verse 20, "Whence then cometh wisdom? Where is the place of understanding? Seeing it is hid from the eyes of all living, and kept close from the fowls of the air. Destruction and death say, We have heard the fame thereof with our ears. God understandeth the way thereof, and he knoweth the place thereof. For he looketh to the ends of the earth, and seeth under the whole heaven, to make weight for the winds, and he weigheth the waters by measure. When he made a degree for the rain, and a way for the lightning of thunder." We just saw that last night. And you heard it, did we not? When he makes way for the lightning and the thunder. "Then did he see it, and declare it. He prepared it, yea, and searched it out. And unto man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." Here we have maybe a bit of a ruling stick, or a barometer, or a gauge for how have we applied wisdom and understanding at our heart, isn't it, when we're willing to depart from evil? I must admit that when I have failed, it is because of a lack of exercising understanding of God, that has caused me to an arrogance, proceed with what I think is right and are okay to do when it was contrary to Scripture. Understanding. In Psalms chapter 119, verse 34, "Give me understanding, and I shall keep thy law. Yea, I shall observe it with my whole heart." And then in verse 99 of the same chapter, "I have more understanding than all my teachers, for thy testimonies are my meditation." I remember years ago, not very far down the road from here, there was a man by the name of Jacob Dirksen. I think y'all, or a good number of y'all would remember him, living not far down this way. And they were over here, and we knew Jacob for being an excavator in the community. He had a bulldozer, and he was very good with it. As his boys grew up, soon thereafter, his boys also became known to be skilled operators of the bulldozer. And I remember standing behind my dad and Jacob as they were talking, and the boys were operating two bulldozers that he had. And my dad said to Jacob, "How's that make you feel? Your boys sort of bumping you off, bumping you out or off of that machine." And you know, the machine was getting the attention. That's where the focus was on. It's what they were doing. They were doing some captivating dirt work. And I remember Jake's response to my dad. He said, "Well, I look at it this way. I expect my boys to be smarter and wiser than I. I will tell them everything that I know, and then they're going to learn whatever they experience and what God gives them." I'm not sure why that stuck with me so much. Fathers and mothers, is it the goal of your heart to bring an understanding to your children, and that they should become wise under your care and supervision. Psalms chapter 119, 125, I am thy servant, give me understanding that I may know thy testimonies. In Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 15, and I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. When I read that, it really smote me. How am I to you? I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. I'm not certain what your experience has been, and I would just say that it is very important for us as leaders in our congregations for us to have an understanding heart. Maybe we haven't always hit that target very well, but it is certainly my desire, and I'm sure Brother Michael's as well, and Ralph, Elmer, for us to be people, men of understanding. Not just hearing what you say, but to understand. There are three things that I have here, ways to understand, better understand each other. The first one, think first and then speak. Start by thinking about what you're going to say well before you say it. If this is difficult, employ the breathing in and out technique. Sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to be that practical. Take 1 or 2 deep breaths, and you can do this without seeming too obvious while you consider how you want to frame your words. What's the purpose of your conversation? Do you need to inform, request information, ask for assistance, offer sympathy, encouragement, or counsel? When you're clear why you need to say something, your message will likely be better received and understood. Thinking before we speak. The second one, say less and mean more. This one, I must confess, is probably my greatest weakness, to say less. Even as of now, it is close to time to quit. Should I say too much? I could very easily do that. Say less and mean more. Another practical suggestion is to say few words, but choose them wisely. People tend to lose concentration or interest when a conversation drags on. Get to the point as quickly as possible. Besides, if you earn a reputation as someone who's accurate and precise, who doesn't waste others' time with empty words, people will listen to you more and likely better understand what you say when you speak. I say these first of all to myself. My wife has reminded me numerous times, honey, you use too many words. You say too much. And I thank her for that. God help me to learn to say less and mean more. And number 3, learn how to listen. So important to learn how to listen. Who would have thought that we have to learn that? You can hear with your ear and entirely miss a point. Of vital importance is that you develop your listening skills instead of anticipating what you're going to say and tuning out the speaker. Keep your focus and concentration on what he or she is saying. If you want to develop better understanding of others, you must hear what they're saying. Listen to the words and the tone. This will give you insight to their feelings. So be an active listener. This is not only respectful, it is necessary to the process of understanding and being understood. Jesus was our perfect example. I'm just going to turn there very quickly to Matthew chapter 27. And I really want us to think. It is very nice to be understood. We all love to be understood. And it feels bad when we're misunderstood. I could give you examples in my life. I won't go into that. But there are times when I have struggled with forgiving someone that I felt that just misunderstood me, entirely misunderstood me. And I have to think of Jesus on the cross, hanging there and holding all of the misunderstanding of the world on his shoulders. I'd taken up the cross for all of us. Out of that flowed love, and that love flowing into our hearts enables us to endure misunderstanding. in chapter 27, verse 35, and they crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And sitting down, they watched him there, and set up over his head this accusation written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Then were there two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand, another on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple, and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. A tremendous misunderstanding. Here was Jesus on the cross, and they threw it in his face. You said you could tear down the temple and build it in 3 days. And they didn't understand what he was talking about. 3 days later, they understood. In Philippians chapter 4, Paul says there, Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. I pray that that peace, that wonderful peace that God gives us, can keep your heart as you go through life and through the relationships that you have, that God has blessed you with, that you can find God's love in your heart so that you too can be understanding. Shall we kneel for a word of prayer? Lord, we come before you.